Well, Ben, the ratings for Bellator 197 are in, and they are not mind-blowing, as
3-4 million? What are we thinking?
403,000 viewers.
Checked
out the card headlined by Michael Chandler versus Brandon Gertz, and that included 242,000 people watching on the Paramount Network and 161,000 watching on CMT, as has been noted by multiple websites at this point. That put Bellator behind Combate Americas, the MMA promotion, I believe run by Campbell McLaren.
Yeah,
right?
I get their emails all the time. Can't seem to make it stop.
The old UFC co-founder.
The people watching on CMT, that's an accident, right?
Just left the television on
after
that show where Stone Cold Steve Austin takes people out to the Broken Skull Ranch and makes them run up a hill. I imagine that's on CMT. I don't know that for sure, but it seems like
I don't even know if that's a real show, but I'm sold on the pitch if that's what it is.
The good news, I guess, if you're Bellator, Ben, is they got Bellator 198 coming up this Saturday night, featuring a main event that is Frank Mir against Fedor Emilianenko, of course, as part of the Bellator 2018 Heavyweight Grand Prix. I don't know if there's a lot of other stuff on this card that's going to bring in ratings, but you would think if you were looking for a pick-me-up, and you are Scott Coker's misfit band of toys over here, running unopposed with no UFC event this weekend, maybe you pin your hopes on Fedor versus Mir. Is that fair to say?
You've got to. You're doing your whole heavyweight Grand Prix tournament. You got the allure of Fedor against another former UFC champion in Frank Mir. Even if it's a fight that would have been a whole lot cooler if you'd found a way to do it 10 years ago, here you are now. People will tune in for some weirdness. I mean, people are already into this heavyweight Grand Prix idea, only semi-ironically. And then when you trot out Frank Mir against Frank Mir in whatever questionable shape against Fedor Emelianenko in whatever questionable shape, we are going to show up to watch exactly what sort of train wreck that becomes.
One of my favorite stories, or at least one of my favorite memories of MMA fandom before I became an MMA reporter, was when I went down to Vegas with a group of buddies back in the day when Frank Mir was the heavyweight champion, and we showed up to an in-store event at a Best Buy.
Nice.
Where Frank Mir was going to be signing autographs, and we were the only people there.
Whoa.
So Frank Mir basically hung out with us and shot the shit for 15 minutes. And I remember we asked him about every sort of high profile pride heavyweight of the day. So it was man, how would you do against Mirko Cro Cop? And basically Frank Mir's response to every single person we brought up was, "Oh, I'd kill that guy," in classic Frank Mir fashion. The only pride heavyweight that he even had to think about for a second was Big Nog. And I think that was basically some jujitsu respect, right? Because Frank Mir thinks he's just going to kill everyone at this point because he's UFC heavyweight champion. Big Nog, he was kind of oh yeah, that would be a tough fight.
Did he say, I think Big Nog will probably wobble me, but then try to get on the ground with me, and then I'll reverse him and break his arm?
Yeah, he called it some 10 years out.
Wow.
But he was pretty sure he would kill Fedor Emelianenko back in those days. So I guess I'm just going to circle around to make this relevant to today's discussion somehow. He gets his chance, right?
And honestly, I hate to say it, I like his chance. I don't know who you pick in this one, but I honestly have to pick Frank Mir here.
Yeah,
not knowing the kind of shape that he's going to come in.
Right. I mean, despite the fact that he's 2-6 in his last 8 fights, he's probably still the pick to take here, right? If he shows up in a semblance of shape, he stands to have a pretty big weight advantage, a pretty big size advantage over Fedor Emelianenko. And you'd think if he doesn't stand in front of him and get hit with those murder balls, that probably he stands a good chance of maybe a submission victory here. This has got to be a weird feeling for Frank Mir, though, don't you think? Just we talked about the octagon time of Frankie Edgar during round number 2. For so many years, Frank Mir was one of these guys that was just a stalwart of the octagon, through ups and downs, through all kinds of personal, situations, ins and outs, the motorcycle wreck and all that, being the champion.
He was there for 15 years for a UFC employee. He only had 2 non-UFC fights.
He started out in the UFC in his early 20s, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe even 19 or so. I think he was 21 or 22 years old. Fought all the way back in the blood and guts era when Wes Sims stomped on his face and got disqualified. It's got to be a weird feeling for him now to turn around and show up on fight night to a Bellator event, I would think.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe he doesn't even know exactly how weird a feeling it will be yet until he goes and does it. There are some ways that Frank Mir could fuck around and lose to Fedor Emelianenko.
Well, yeah, anybody could lose to Fedor, right? If Fedor reaches into his back pocket for one of those right hands and hits you with it,
and you just happen to be standing there when he does,
you're probably going to sleep. I would think.
I also got to think that that's the one thing Frank Mir is really worried about here. And if that's it, then you ought to be able to find a way around it, especially against the Fedor of today, who still fights like it's 2006. And you can just do that, and that will be a recipe for every problem that ails you. We've seen in the very recent past that doesn't really work for him as well anymore. Frank Mir probably going to try to use the big man stuff, suffocate him against the cage, don't stand out there and let him throw those murder balls at your head. If Frank Mir gets past this one, does he rocket to the top of your list of favorites to finish it just by virtue of being an actual heavyweight?
Well, I think if you're Frank Mir, you got to think about it that way, right? Because the winner of this fight gets Chael Sonnen, right? Chael Sonnen beat Rampage. I didn't just imagine that. Right?
No,
that happened.
That happened.
Okay, so he's advanced to the semifinals. Unless they go in there and mess around with the pairings, which I think they've said they won't do, but in sort of like a pride situation, like maybe they would redo the pairings. But the winner of this fight gets Chael Sonnen in the semifinals. And if you're Frank Mir, you got to like your chances there too, right? Just because you are going to be so much bigger than Chael Sonnen.
Right.
And submissions are kind of Chael Sonnen's kryptonite.
Well, yeah, and that his whole idea is going to be to go in there, double leg you, and stay on top of you. And yeah, you're going to have a harder time doing that against a guy like Frank Mir. I wonder, though, when you look at a fight like this, we can sit here and make fun of it a few days out all we want.
I'm not making fun of it. I'm ready to go. Let's watch this thing.
I'm going to be, I have to admit, legitimately excited by the time the opportunity to watch Frank Mir versus Fedor rolls around. Makes me flash back to the question we received earlier from somebody who only became a shit-eating wild man sometimes after UFC 94. Is that baffling to them? If you're a relatively
that's because they didn't watch Frank Mir break Tim Sylvia's arm. They didn't have to watch the excruciating replay of that thing, which was awesome.
And see, I don't even know how I would go about explaining my legitimate and ongoing interest in a fight like this one to somebody like that. I don't know how to put it.
Yeah, you kind of had to be there.
You kind of had to be there. And then you would appreciate being here now, which we all acknowledge. It's not quite as cool as then, but still something.
Yeah. Boy, now that we're getting into some bracketology here, heavy into some bracketology.
Okay.
In the Bellator heavyweight
study
world
of
Grand
brackets
Prix.
For anybody out there.
The one side of this bracket that started out with Matt Mitrione, Roy Nelson, Ryan Bader, and King Mo, seems like pretty heavy on that side, right? Pretty, you got some actual heavyweights and a lot of talent over on that side of the bracket, whereas the opposite side had Rampage Jackson, Chael Sonnen, Fedor Emelianenko, and Frank Mir.
So your bracketology conclusion is that Frank Mir has the easiest path to the...
I'm just saying, you can't see the brackets right now, but the right side of the bracket seems a little bit weighted to me.
Are you accusing some malfeasance here?
No, I'm just saying that's how it looks, like, now that I really look at the bracket. One side of the bracket seems much more difficult than the other side.
Also worth pointing out here, we're in late April. We're still trying to get through the opening round here.
Well, if you're Bellator, isn't the kind of smart thing to do to sort of slow this baby down? Like, you don't want to schedule a bunch of these heavyweight fights right in a row.
You don't?
You want everybody to have a good chance to get nice and rested up.
You want them to have a good chance to generally watch a Michael Chandler event on CMT?
I'm just saying, if you're Matt Mitrione, go cool your heels somewhere, man. Take a vacation, get back in the cage, get in good shape, and then come in here for the semifinals.
What's your prediction here for this fight?
It's really hard to predict, isn't it? I mean, I'm going to say Frank Mir wins. I'm going to say Frank Mir pulls off a surprising first-round submission. I'm going to say Frank Mir drops Fedor Emelianenko with a punch, as we have seen happen in several fights, most recently, and then follows him to the ground and hooks up some kind of choke.
I say Frank Mir via decision as the fight slows to a crawl in rounds 2 and 3.
That is also very possible. All right, Ben, let's do Just Saying Stuff, and then we will get out of here this week. Ben, what is your Just Saying Stuff?
Well, we mentioned earlier in the show Eddie Alvarez showing up backstage at UFC Atlantic City.
Wearing a pretty awesome Underground King t-shirt, PT Dubs.
Yeah. And also in like a 10-minute interview, and we had the video on MMA Junkie, and he's just kind of spitting fire in all directions, and it was actually pretty awesome. And then when people keep asking him about Dustin Poirier saying that Eddie Alvarez is avoiding the rematch, and Eddie Alvarez kind of makes the point like, well, yeah, I will avoid a fight if I think there's a better opportunity somewhere else, but I'm not like ducking anyone because I'm scared. And if you say that, then you obviously don't know shit about fighting, because like, look at my resume. So, and I wrote a little something about this, but if you go and you look at Eddie Alvarez's resume, let me just read you off the last 10. Not cherry picking anything. I'm just reading you the last 10 opponents Eddie Alvarez has faced.
Okay.
Justin Gaethje.
Okay.
Dustin Poirier.
Okay.
Conor McGregor. Rafael Dos Anjos. Anthony Pettis. Gilbert Melendez. Donald Cerrone. Michael Chandler. Patricky Ferrier. Shinya Aoki.
It's pretty good. Pretty good list of competition there.
I'm just saying, don't come at Eddie Alvarez like that unless you've seen the list. Because Jesus fucking Christ, there's not an easy fight in there. I'm just saying.
Are you saying you think that Eddie Alvarez may want to boost Chris Jericho's WWE gimmick where he brings a clipboard and tells people that they're going to be next on the list?
I could see it working. You look at that list and you think, man, the people who on that list who aren't either the man or close to the man now were either the man or close to the man at the time Eddie Alvarez fought them. Gee, that's years of hard work right there.
Solid point. Well, Ben, this week I'm just saying I'm going to need an official co-main event podcast weigh-in here on a certain issue. You know that we are, I guess critics might say, overly obsessed with MMA nicknames.
I've never heard that. Never heard that criticism.
What I need to know is, as a podcast, where do we come down on the big pretty Justin Willis goes out there and gets the unanimous decision victory in a heavyweight fight against Chase Sherman this past weekend?
Okay. I need to know some things about it, though, because for one thing, he's not that big for a heavyweight.
6'3", 265 pounds.
Oh, okay. Bigger than I thought. Do you regard him as pretty?
Yeah. I could see, like, if Justin Willis gets cleaned up for like a Saturday night out on the town.
Be a pretty man?
Yeah. Seems like
so it's a sincere nickname. It's not an ironic nickname.
I mean, pretty. I would not be surprised to find out that Justin Willis considers himself to be quite pretty. I'm just wondering, because I'm saying all conference San Jose State defensive lineman, degree in sociology, likes to go out there and just whip them bungalows around. If we can get into the big pretty, he might be on the list of guys. I'm minor guy at this point.
I'm going to say right now, I'm into it.
Just saying.
Big pretty.
We're into the big pretty. That's going to do it for this week's co-main event podcast. Come check us out next week. We'll break down all the stuff that happens at this Bellator 198 card. I think that the UFC is off to like May 12th.
Oh, how about that?
So,
kick your heels up.
Maybe ain't shit going on the next couple weeks. So you know what that means. We will lean heavily on you, the listener, to send in some questions.
Even more than we already do.
As for right now, though, we are done. We are through. We are out.
So can I start calling myself like the moderately sized pretty?
I mean, I guess.
Average height pretty. No?
Yeah, sure. Go for it, man. Try that out around the hockey.
Yeah, we'll see.
Come back with your results.